10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 106. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 106 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. How are you? Hope you had a great week and hope you're ready for a brand new episode. This is a part 2, so we're going to continue our discussion on Moment's Notice. Going to give you a couple more ideas to help up your playing on this particular very, very difficult tune and get you going a little bit deeper on it. So a little bit of housekeeping before we start. If you're brand new to the show, welcome. We're so glad you're here. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you'd like to get the PDF for this episode, you can find it on our Patreon site. That's patreon.com/10minutejazzlesson. Or you can head over to our website where there's all the back episodes, a lot of cool stuff there to check out. That is 10minutejazzlesson.com. So if you haven't checked out the Patreon site, we've got over 115 people over there that have chosen to donate a small portion of their hard-earned money every month in order to get those PDFs and show their love for the show. And we really, really thank them. Every single episode, you guys are what makes it possible. Wanted to do a quick shout out to everybody that has come on board this past week. Thank you to Joseph, Van, Peter, Albert, Dave, and Howard. Those are our new supporters for this week, and thank you guys so much for showing your love for the podcast and getting access to all of the cool things that are on the Patreon site. So again, you can find that at patreon.com/10minutejazzlesson. All right, let's jump into today's episode. Like I said, today is a part 2. We're going to continue our discussion on the great John Coltrane tune, Moment's Notice. So a quick little recap about what we talked about last week. We talked about, the fact that this tune has all these chromatic 2/5 progressions, and it really doesn't sound very good if we just cut and paste vocabulary over this. It's kind of obvious that you're doing that when you do it over this tune, and it's a lot different than some of the more traditional bebop tunes where we can just kind of paste together things and it will still sound great. This one has a bit of a different approach. So we talked about placing some barriers, some parameters around your playing, and really investigating certain ways to go about playing over this in order to develop a unique style and to really, really just know the changes. That's what this one really comes down to, is just knowing how to navigate these changes with really good sounding material. And again, I know I sound like I'm kind of beating a dead horse here, but not falling back on our pre-programmed vocabulary like we can do elsewhere. So last week we talked about, starting up high and coming down, and that was our parameter. Was we were going to play lines that go in one direction. So starting up high on a chord tone and then just continuing a run of eighth notes all the way down until a resolution point. So now we're going to take it in a few other directions. Obviously, there's about 1.5 million ways to do this. So now we want to talk about some of those other ways and maybe dive a little bit deeper. So the first thing I want to mention that's actually not on the sheet from this week is last week we talked about descending stuff, right? Talked about starting on a note, going down in a long eighth note line. I want to stress the fact that you need to practice things ascending, right? So take the same exercises that we did last week and just flip them. So you're starting on a chord tone and you're going up into the next set of chord changes until the resolution point. That's something that I think most of you can do without me actually writing it out. So I'm going to kind of put that on you. That's going to be your homework before you get into the stuff that we're going to talk about today. So once we are done with that ascending practice, now what we want to do, and this brings us to our first exercise for this week, is we want to do a combination of ascending and descending. So what I've done here is in exercise number 1, over the first half of the measure, we're going to ascend, And over the second half of the measure, we're going to descend. So it gives us a really, really interesting line because we're changing directions halfway through the measure, which is going to give our listeners a little bit of variety in our playing, and is also really going to test our ability to ascend and descend in the exact same measure. So exercise number 1, what I'm doing is I'm starting the progression on the third of the minor chord. I'm going to ascend for the first half of the measure, and I'm going to descend for the second half of the measure, and I'm going to do that all the way through until the resolution point. Now, one thing that you have to do that makes this even a little bit more difficult than the other stuff that we've done is you're going to have to skip some notes in order to end up in the right place. So if you look over the first measure, we have a concert E minor 7 chord. When we start on the third, we want to go 3, 4, 5, and then it doesn't make too much sense to go to the sixth over that minor chord because that leaves us in a weird spot when we get to the A7 chord that comes after it. So what we do is we actually skip the sixth, jump straight to the seventh, because that's going to lead us into a bunch of really cool options over that A7 chord that then is going to bring us into the descending. Now you're going to notice that a lot over the minor chords is that there's going to be a lot of skipping. And I want you to sit down with these lines and really, really analyze them to kind of see what I'm doing after you hear them. And I think it will all make sense. Of course, you can reach out and ask any questions if it doesn't make sense. But I think the reason when I do skip that I am doing it will become pretty apparent to you while you're reading through these exercises. So let's check out what exercise number 1 sounds like. This is half of the measure ascending and the other half of the measure descending. So we're starting to get into some kind of cool sounding stuff when we start to combine the ascending with the descending. You can hear that it's actually starting to sound less like an exercise and more like something that you might actually play over this tune while still concentrating on educating ourselves really how to play over these changes. So of course, as we usually talk about with opposites, whenever we work on something, we have to flip it on its head and work on the opposite. So over the second exercise this week, what I'm doing is I'm starting on the third at the beginning of the progression, the third over the minor chord, and I'm descending and then ascending. So I'm just flipping it on its head. And again, there are these skips involved in this particular exercise as well, because we need to line things up, and that's actually an essential skill that you need to develop as a musician. Is you're not going to be able to play everything stepwise. And when you're playing a line that is scalar in nature, you need to be able to incorporate some skips and larger jumps into that line, not only for harmonic purposes and lining everything up, but just for making the line sound more interesting, right? So that's kind of what we're doing. And of course, in this exercise frame of mind, we're really doing it just to make it fit, because you would notice that last week we didn't really utilize any skips, but this week we're using a ton of them to accommodate this ascending/descending motion, or flipping it on its head. So here's exercise number 2 on your PDF for this week. Starting on the third, ascending down the minor chord, and then ascending on the dominant chord. All right, here's what it sounds like. So that one's actually my favorite one. I think that one starts to really sound close to something that I would actually play over the tune if I were improvising in real time, on a gig or playing this tune for real. And it's really important to mention, just like so many of the things that we talk about, this is just the beginning. You should be coming up with a million permutations on this and doing it every way you possibly can. And kind of the way that I always think about these things when I know I'm starting to do the right thing is I kind of get lost in the possibilities, and I feel like I could practice for hours just doing something simple like this. That's kind of how I know that I'm starting to get to the meat of the exercise or the concept that I'm trying to work on. So make sure that you always take it a bunch of steps further than what I'm showing you and the things that I can explain in only 10 minutes. And if you ever have questions on any of that, or you want to get a little bit deeper into it, definitely hit me up for some Skype lessons or send me questions or whatever. That is really, really possible. If we can spend more time together, we can really get a heck of a lot deeper on this stuff and get you to that next level of playing that I can't get you to in the 10-minute format. All right. Okay, so that about does it for this week. Send me any questions, 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. Thanks to all the brand new Patreon subscribers. If you're not on board yet, please consider tossing us about $3 a month, getting all the PDFs, and getting a bunch of other really, really cool stuff coming your way. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hope you have a fantastic weekend, and we will talk to you soon. Bye.